When Craig told me what the name of the panel was, I fluttered a little bit. Wasn't quite sure I wanted to be a rock star, but I guess we are. And so in a couple of minutes, we're going to have each participant on this session introduce themselves. And we're really going to try to focus in, pun intended, on innovation in our field. That's what OIS has been about from the original concept now over 12 years ago. And it's exciting, to highlight and launch the session today with those that have cared about innovation from the beginning of their careers and have made a difference. And one of the things I had a little bit of fun with is I asked each of the panelists to give me some data on how many companies, no kidding, have they founded, helped fund, lead from a management standpoint, or be active on the board and so forth. And unfortunately, it fell just short of 100. Only 77 companies that this Rockstar panel has had direct involvement in helping launch. And fortunately, a number of us have had the good fortune of also working together during this period of time. So we're going to go through introductions. I've asked each of us to prepare a slide. And so if we could have the slide for my background come up on stage. Oh, okay. Oops, now I'll back it up. So I started my professional activity as a kid in Indiana, grew up on a farm, and went to Purdue, PhD in mechanical engineering, studied veterinary, became a biomedical engineer before it was an actual profession. Worked for a few years at Indiana University Department of Surgery as an assistant professor, got recruited to come to the West Coast. Thought, well, Marcia and I will go out here for a couple of years and then get back to the Midwest. And here we are a few years later, still based in California. I had the good fortune of being asked to start an ophthalmology company within a corporation, American Hospital Supply. That became AMO. Was sold to Allergan and then went public as Advanced Medical Optics, became Abbott Medical Optics, and is now J&J Vision. What a nice journey for that company. Then Marcia and I founded Chiron Vision in our home in Irvine in the late 90s, or in the late 80s rather, and helped build that business with much help from investors and colleagues and friends. Sold that business to Bausch & Lomb in 98. Got into venture capital, first with Brentwood, and then co-founded Versant. And years later, Dick Lindstrom, Andy Corley, and I teamed up to have an investing partnership we call Flying L Partners. And I've been the good fortune of having been involved in founding, managing, or investing in some 28 companies in our field. So what a delight. Michael.
Sure, thank you. So engineer and scientist by training and entrepreneur by mentor training. And I'm actually fortunate to have two of my really important mentors here, Bill and Mark Blumenkrantz, that have really helped me shape my career. I've started four what I would call more mature companies, so three of which are in the eye care space. So co-founded in each case, so Oculeave, Oyster Point, Tarsus Pharmaceuticals. Also briefly got out of eye care and went into chronic pain with Presidio Medical and came running right back. I'm delighted to be here today. I do have a little new co, so super early stage that having a lot of fun with, and that's an eye care too.
Thank you, Michael. Mark?
Thank you, Bill. Well, I've had the chance to work with four of the people on this podium together on projects. So it's a small fraternity or collegial, and a collegial one at that. So I'm the third generation physician, and I never worried about what field to go into. It was just a question of whether it would be ophthalmology, neurology, or gastroenterology. But I started in academic medicine at Stanford and Bascom Palmer, and came back to Stanford. I started my first company while I was in Royal Oak, Michigan, in a private group there, and it failed, and I learned a lot from that, and I thought I'd never do that again, but when I got back to Stanford, I realized that it was a much more hospitable environment for companies, and so I started dabbling, and again, I was the chair of the Department of Ophthalmology at Stanford for 18 years, and during that time I participated pretty actively in the startup world, and so I founded 12 companies, and I served subsequently on the board of, or during that time, of 11 companies, of which 5 were public. Bill asked about hit rates, and so I checked the numbers, and depending upon how you the hard part I had was defining success. What is success? Is it a great product? Is it a great exit? Is it both, or is it just number of people helped? You could use any of those metrics to define success. But the success rate, I would say, was realistically somewhere between 60% and 75%, and 15% failures in the ones that I started, and in the ones that I sat on the boards, it was about 64% success and 36% failure. I continue to do this now, and I run a small investment fund incubator called Lagunitas Biosciences, and I continue my board work, and I just love working in this space. Nothing excites me more except my family, of course.
Thank you, Mark. Tom?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here, and really thank you to the OAS organizers for inviting us all to be on this distinguished panel. Just by way of background, I'm a scientist, a molecular biologist. I got my PhD in genetics at Stanford, and have really been interested in gene therapy, for my whole career. I had the good fortune of meeting Mark Blumenkrantz as a student, and really became interested and involved and actively pursuing ophthalmology, which has been a passion of mine, since then. After Stanford, I went to Genentech, and I was involved in the commercial launch of Lucentis, and also was very fortunate to have some terrific mentors there, including Quentin Oswald and other folks that were sort of long time known in the ophthalmology field. And it's just such a pleasure to look around at other companies and see all these terrific colleagues from the Genentech days who have done so well in various pursuits. I left in 2010 to start a company, and Mark and I, founded it together, Avalanche Biotechnologies, and that was, what a tremendous learning experience as a first-time CEO. It was terribly hard to raise money in 2008 and 2009, and then got easier when the biotech market sort of recovered from that, and sort of saw a lot through that experience. Went on to be a COO of a company called Oncourse, which was an oncolytic virus company for solid tumors. And then, really went into sort of formation investing, where, we could put early seed capital into companies and start them and take an active role in building them. And since then, I started Cyclus Vision, which is a medical device company, optometry company for childhood myopia, that was sold to Cooper Vision. Irenix, which is a private company, and Genesance, which is a gene therapy company, and also Exora, which is a gene therapy company for glaucoma. So anyway, excited to be here, and thanks again.
Thanks, Tom. Gene?
I'm a little bit different in the sense that I'm been academic the whole way, except for the 22 companies I've been involved with. And it was never an intention to do that. I just was kind of squeezed out of others' roles, and the only thing I could do was start a company, and I couldn't fire myself. It was lucky in that way. My father, when I went into academia, said, "What are you going to do? You're going to feed your kids your papers. And I make a joke that they had plenty to eat. And sometimes some of us, like me, count the number of patents. I don't know why, it's not so important. And so I looked up some of my really good buddies that I have huge respect for, like Steve Charles and Robert Markham and other people in my field. And, they may have, 10 or 20 patents, but they've had huge effect on the world. I do have 7 grandkids and 2 more incubating, so I'm good at creating that kind of stuff. And of those, maybe most proud of that if you have it. And then finally, 8, we started this incubator with Bill, 8 of those companies with Bill. And I'm pretty sure I don't know if I have that, if that's the record or not, but that's all he could stand. And I appreciate so much his making that happen. He's really responsible for the entrepreneurial wing of my life.
Well, thanks, Gene. And Jerry.
All right, thank you very much. Really appreciate being here today. I was getting prepared to come to San Diego, and my children are 15, 13, and 11. They're very involved in my business, so they were looking at the advertisement for this panel, and my daughter says to me, "Hey, Dad, you're the only guy on the panel that's not a doctor, so why do they have you?" And I said, they need someone to represent someone that doesn't have the scientific or the degree as being as a doctor. So I think my journey is a little bit different to being here 30 years in ophthalmology. So just very fortunate to be among all of these entrepreneurs. So I graduated from the University of Massachusetts 1989. Upon walking off stage with a diploma, I joined Muro Pharmaceutical right in my hometown in the Boston area. And Muro was founded out of Mass Eye and Air. I'm sure everyone recognizes the name Muro 128, so I'm responsible for selling a real expensive salt water, and kind of shows my age for when that product existed. And Muro was a great journey. It's kind of where I got invested into ophthalmology, fell in love with ophthalmology, and over the course of my career, which is heavy commercial, business development, and strategy, we eventually exited, sold to AstraZeneca. I was there for a long time, very excited about that opportunity. And then I joined a biotech in North Carolina that was essentially in a research and development outfit that was heavily involved in the treatment of cystic fibrosis for diqualfosol tetrasodium. But they wanted to mine the technology in ophthalmology, so joined there. Bob Dempsey, one of my colleagues, and I started there and pioneered and really launched the commercial business for Inspire. And many years later, we sold the organization to Merck. It was a successful exit on the ophthalmology side. Have nothing but great experiences running the business. At Inspire, had a short stint at Nycox, brought him in from France into the US. We launched the business and we were quickly acquired by Valiant. And then Sun Pharmaceuticals came to me actually to see if I wanted to buy a couple of assets in ophthalmology, and I turned the tables and said, why have me buy them? Why don't we build a new business for you in the United States? So I launched Sun Ophthalmics for a large company, which is, I consider very entrepreneurial. Built that business up over 2 to 3 years. And then I was sitting at a restaurant in New York with my co-founder, Jason Warner. And we basically said, we keep on building these companies for other people. Why don't we build our own company from dirt? So we put a strategy on a napkin, met with private equity, got funded, and we executed on the strategy at Ivance. And within 3 years, we had a very successful exit with Santen. So that's been my journey. And then recently, blessed to join this amazing organization in this past January after I left Santen it was originally called First String Research. But we changed the name to Sequel, and we have a platform technology, and we just got the team in place, and we'll be sharing more at this meeting. So very excited to be here, and look forward to chatting with everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Let's see, we'll back up. Okay, maybe we'll go back to the title slide for the rest of our discussion, if someone could do that. What I thought I'd kind of probe a bit, we could talk about Why ophthalmology? Why ophthalmology? Anyone? Go.
Well, I trained in ophthalmology, so it was probably the only thing I knew how to do when I started innovating. But I would say ophthalmology is considered one of certainly the kings or queens of medical specialties, because it really combines fabulous ability to benefit patients who really appreciate what you're doing for them. At the same time, you can combine medical diagnosis with therapy. And then finally, I think ophthalmology has been the learning laboratory for innovation in the United States across all specialties. If you look at really the important advances that have occurred over the last 50 years, starting with lasers, starting with microsurgery, starting with gene therapy, with local drug delivery, you name it, they get done first in ophthalmology, and I think it's because it's an isolated organ that's relatively walled off from the rest of the body, and you can try things out relatively easily and safely, and then extend it. So I think it's been a launching pad for so many technologies that if I were to advise a young person wanting to go into innovation, where should they start? I would say ophthalmology would be as good a place as any. So those were my reasons.
Michael, what brought you toward ophthalmology?
For me, I actually was assigned to work in ophthalmology. So, I actually started in a program at Stanford, and they said, "Hey, look, you and your team, you're going to innovate in ophthalmology." And I'll be honest, I was actually pretty disappointed at the time. I was really hoping to work in head and neck, and you know how wrong I was. I mean, I thought it's like, all right, the organ's that big, like what can possibly be going on in there? And here I am, is probably going to spend my career in this space. So, you know, why I stay in ophthalmology, and I mentioned I had a brief stint, or a stint anyway, where I went aside to chronic pain, and had a lot of fun and success there. But coming back, there's just not a community like this in many places. I mean, it's just amazing the interaction, the large industry level, small industry level, the academics, the clinical community. I mean, it really is a community. And that's part of why I was really excited to see OIS back on the calendar again. I mean, just what a great event this has been to just get everybody together and start, seeing all your friends. And I think that's part of what's nice, is that there is so much communication and collegiality across the sector, and also, as Mark was saying, so much opportunity. I mean, sight is so critical to people.
The path for innovation, often the science and discovery starts in academia, in the lab, and then somehow finds its way with advancement, out into the private sector and beyond. Several of us started as academics. And when I started a very brief time as an assistant professor, as a non-physician in a physician's dominated environment at Indiana University Department of Surgery in the School of Medicine, when I went to industry, I was pretty sure that that was going to be a little bit of the dark side. And what I found was not only were the ethics awesome and strong, but the drive to start and finish, not just start and do another experiment and then get another grant and then do another experiment. It was very different. So then when I had to go back to academia to try to license some good stuff, I found it was harder than I wanted it to be. So those of you that started in or continue to be involved in academia, what's your view on how good are we on the academic side at teaming up with innovators and taking technologies out of the lab so that it can get to the patient? Gene, why don't you share your thoughts?
It's been a real journey for me as an individual. Started at Duke, the guy that with Mockmer who started vitrectomy, and his view was a very priestly view, and that you should protect your inventions, you should partner with companies and get royalties, but the inventors themselves shouldn't get anything. We should give it back to the department. And I thought, how nice is that? Of course, has to do with my kids.
So then you moved on from Duke, is that right?
After 9 years, and I went to Hopkins and started, and I decided to give a little bit to the engineers that were working with me in this thing called the Mad Lab. And then I thought I could change the university. And I remember Mort Goldberg's telling me, Gene, what are you thinking? The universities haven't changed for a millennium. There's no company, there's no, business that has ever lasted that long. Only religion lasted longer than universities, and he was proved right. And I told Bill at breakfast. Some of you may know this, but I was distraught. I was absolutely distraught. And Bill goes, "Let's have breakfast." And this is to me defines who Bill Link is. And I'm having breakfast with him, and he's saying, he listens to me tell this woe is me story, and he goes, "Gene, this is going to sound a little harsher than the reality, but you absolutely must leave." I was having trouble with that. "And I will help you." And that's how Foresight Labs got started in that moment. And so thank you, Bill. And if we've done anything good, and we have, it was that person that made it happen.
Universities have made real progress, haven't they? Mark, what are you thinking?
Yeah, well, living in Silicon Valley, side by side with really a vibrant community. When I started, I think industry, at least, certainly, even at Stanford then, but certainly at Bascom Palmer and within the leadership of American Ophthalmology, was kind of viewed as a necessary evil. Industry was a necessary evil to fundraise from, and then to sell you instruments to do the surgery and to do the real work. And I don't know why I had the bug, but I had the bug, and so I felt like I was living in the closet for years. And it was really a very unprofessional thing to do to work with industry directly, certainly in the 70s and 80s. And I started doing that, and I thought it was really important. And so I started proselytizing a little bit internally inside the departments. And when I got to Stanford, I found at least there was some kindred thinking at Stanford. And Stanford understood. Stanford OTL, Office of Technology and Licensing, was a huge source of pride and revenue to the university. And it enabled a lot. And there was a lot of back and forth between academia and industry. The president of Stanford was informally at Genentech. The prior president of Stanford founded an information technology firm. So I think it became acceptable. And once I had that foothold, all I wanted to do was just to convince every academician that as part of your career path, they don't pay you very much in academia, but you can supplement your income. But more importantly, you can learn skills and have professional satisfaction and recognition, and you can really make a difference. Somebody called it leverage to me. Now, I'm familiar with financial leverage, obviously, and financing deals, but the idea of leverage is, to me, what finally was most appealing, because I could help one patient at a time, or I could teach a resident who could then help other patients, who could then teach other residents. But if you invented something that could be used for hundreds, thousands, or millions of people, you really were making a difference. And at the end of the day, that's what I think academia is about, is making a difference, shining the way. And I think it's now a partnership, and it's well accepted, and it's in fact desirable. So it's been very rewarding to see that change in mindset between let's keep those guys out of our meetings to let's work together to make the world better.
Yep. So we've made immense progress, and we're still on that journey. But it's really an exciting, positive time, I believe, in our world, and especially in the leading academic centers in the United States. One of the realities is when we're launching a company, when we take it from the lab, into an entity, and now we need to fund it. And everybody here in the room, most likely, and here on the panel, have had immense activity and hence experience at funding projects. What's it like? So Jerry, why don't you start the conversation? What has been your approach? You have more corporate experience than most of us here at the table, but how have you funded your projects?
So in my experience, and specifically calling upon what I did recently with Ivance, I'll start it with the strategy. And, strategy can go different degrees in terms of, is it something coming out of academia? Is it a new chemical entity? Or it could be a strategy that's built on acquiring revenues and bolting on an R&D platform. There's different ways you can skin a cat on building a business. Many people in the audience here have companies that are R&D incubators. Some have, commercial outfits that don't have R&D, and some are hybrid. My last experience, our business was built on acquiring revenue-generating assets, which we believe we would attract both debt lenders and also interested parties in providing equity. So it was a two-prong approach. We felt that with our two-prong approach of having an R&D portion of the business, which provided shots on goal and really aspirational approach to increase valuation for the company, combined with more certainty around assets that are throwing off revenue that we had experience in risk mitigation of commercial execution. We were able, for us, Bill, we were able to attract a number of parties that wanted to put equity in the organization and get the appropriate rates as it came down to debt lending. So, that was our approach, which I think is probably an easier pathway, especially in times now, than somebody, seeking to have funding for just an R&D project.
Yeah.
So that was our approach.
Tom, what's been your experience?
From a fundraising perspective, I've probably done every, angel investing, grant funding, venture capital funding, public funding, begging, passing the hat around the founder table, sort of every single, version of this. And I agree. It's really about the story, and it's sort of making that, as crisp as you can. I think thinking back to Avalanche days, right? There really wasn't that big of a difference between 2012 and 2014, when it was really hard to raise money in 2012, and in 2014 we raised successive rounds of financing very quickly. But I think one of the things that really changed is we were much better at telling the story. If you can tell the story in 30 minutes and leave 15 minutes for questions and feel like the investor really understands it at the end of 45 minutes and walk out of the room, you've succeeded. If it takes you sort of 60 minutes to get through the story and they don't have their questions answered, then there's very little likelihood that investor is going to come back and want to take the next step. And so it is a lot about crisply telling the story. It's a lot about anticipating questions and sort of the slides anticipate and answer the question in that order. I also think, one of the key things as an entrepreneur is, really looking at non-traditional sources of funding. So that could be grants, that could be strategic partnerships, and sort of a build to buy. And those are, tend to be a little less flashy, maybe a little less, grab the headlines compared to, venture financings and IPOs, but they're, equally or sometimes more effective because it really lets you focus on the product and the operations more than sort of the, fanfare and sort of circus around, the company itself and having to, be out there in the more public eye. So I think there's some real advantages to that.
The environment that we've been in for the last couple of years has been challenging, and its cycles, the various global disruption that has happened ripples into the financial markets, no question. Mark, for you, recent funding in the last two to 3 years, what's it been like?
It's been really hard. Well, I would say, let me break it down. I think the last year's been hard, up starting around January. I think before that, with the interest rates being as low as they were, it's still difficult, but people are at least looking for deals. And as Tom pointed out, and I completely agree, it's really about the storytelling. Michael and I went through the biodesign process, and so for me, it's always been about the unmet need. And then explaining that, and then also the sustainable business model, because there's lots of unmet needs that are not sustainable as companies.
When we try to make money for ourselves and our investors, we build the business, try to get it right, and we have to have an exit. Largely, the two potential paths for an exit are selling to an industry leader, mid-tier or global leader, or taking the company public. So those are the likely liquidity paths for us. In terms of the relationship with industry and being able to execute on an exit to industry, that's really critical in our field, broadly and specifically in ophthalmology. So Gene, what's your sense and what's your guidance to all of us relative to understanding and building relationships with industry?
So I've only had one IPO, but I've sold maybe 10 plus companies to industry. And, to me, and I think, Tom, you said it well, it's not flashy, but partnering with companies that know the market, are going to have to sell it, know what the product needs to achieve, is infuriating to have to achieve it as an entrepreneur. But because can't you see? I mean, it's going to work, I promise you. And they want to see it. But I think I have like 4 relationships going on with Alcon now. And so we don't argue over things that you typically argue about, things like indemnity. I just gave up. I accept all risk. And but anyway, I think there are relationships. At Genentech, we sold PDS to 7 years in that relationship. And it's important. Anyway, I very much value those relationships. They make us better and also make us more successful. We know what the market, what we're trying to achieve.
Those up here, how do you make a choice to select an industry relationship early versus not? What are the criteria? How much money you need? What other things?
I mean, from a really practical perspective, it's interesting to sort of wax poetic about what's the ideal thing and what's the ideal vision for that. But what it comes down to is, what are the real choices that you have in front of you that are practical at that point in time, right? And that depends on the financial markets. It depends on who the strategics are, right? One of the benefits, I think, is that strategics tend to be a little more predictable and rational actors because they understand the markets and the risk. But it takes longer. That can be a 6 to 9 month process, which is challenging, and many stakeholders that are involved in those decisions. So I don't know. I think some businesses are maybe better for okay, this is an IPO style business, or this is a business that's better acquired, and some can go either way, and you have to do you have to do what's there.
Bill, you lived in this world more than any of us, but I mean, I would say, in my experience, the strategics have been more open to investing in medical devices. They understand the field really well. They appreciate, and you don't have to explain a lot. I'd say that the venture community, as not to make really broad generalizations, is really looking for more home runs as opposed to singles, doubles, or triples. And so there has to be an option, I would say, for a massive exit, oftentimes, to get the attention, unless you're a serial entrepreneur and you're going back for your 4th or 5th company, at which point they may trust you. So I would say, I hate generalizations, but I would say those are the things. And I think in tough times, large, well-capitalized companies are a much more reliable source of capital, whether it's for devices or for drugs, because generally speaking, they're doing well during those periods of time. They've been waiting for these moments, as you of course know. So.
Yeah, thanks. Other thoughts?
You know, I think on the strategic investments, you see a lot more big strategics have these funds that they are, you know, looking to mine different companies and put investments in, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20 million or other levels. I think you have to look at it a couple of different ways. One, is it a good opportunity to get a strategic link to you earlier? And that could be for companies that are, you know, very early stage and they're looking for funding, and strategics can, you know, have a passive investment, an on-board seat that, you know, see, you know, what work is being done, and you have that affiliation earlier. But also, you know, just knowing my own experience, I've been involved with private equity that, you know, prefer not to go down the road where a strategic may look to put an investment and say, you know, we want to put in, you know, a passive investment, because that could be seen as, you know, that could limit when you're at the point of that you could exit. You know, you always want to be hunted. You don't want to go out hunting. And if sometimes you have to look at it, is that really worth taking an investment from a strategic early on? And, you know, could it scare away another potential buyer because they believe that you may be, you know, linked or close to somebody else? So there's just two different ways you can look at it on those type of investments.
Yeah, good thoughts to share. As we wrap up the panel, let's finish with each of us sharing two things. One is, what are you most proud of? And secondly, what advice and encouragement would you share with fellow innovators and entrepreneurs? So maybe Jerry, we'll start with you.
Sure. You know, what I'm most proud of is, listen, anybody in the room here, you look back at your career, you can be proud of organizations you built, and you can be proud of, you know, different elements of your career, what you've been able to do. But at the end of the day, nothing's made possible without the people that you run with, okay? It's the ability to be in a leadership position and develop talent. There's many people I've been working with for almost 30 years, and I see them now as CEOs, and I see them in senior level positions. So for me personally, what I'm most proud of is that great people that I've been aligned with who have supported me, I now see their growth. That to me is the greatest gift of the position I'm in. The advice I have for entrepreneurs, and I've made mistakes in the past, the one thing you don't want to do is cut corners. You don't want to do things on the cheap when you really should be looking on how you're building your company. For me, if you have an organization and you need talent, you go out and you find that talent. Do not cut short on talent to drive your business forward. Do not do that.
Yeah, so most proud of, I'll echo Gene's comment, it's probably my kids, and second to that, it's the patients that have been treated through technologies that I've had the good fortune to be involved with. And then third, just the opportunity to make impact on people's careers as well. The advice that I would give is there's often a message about perseverance, which I think is a good one, but I would also say, you know, being willing to change and adapting to the environment, whether that's adapting strategy, that's adapting even the product. I think it's going to be really important now because we are in a big headwind environment. There's going to be a lot of failure that happens out there, and really only the best stories are going to get financed. And so adapting to that change and making sure you're above that cutoff.
You know, on the pride side of things, I'd say the things that make me happiest are the patients that have been benefited. I'm proud of the fact that I've had a hand in some interesting technology that I think is used fairly often now in clinical practice and has open up doors to other new things. And the third thing is working with amazing young people, residents, fellows, medical students, working with Tom and Michael and all the people in this room that I've worked with, and to see them going out and surpassing anything I'll ever do, it gives me pride. As far as the advice, I would say it's sort of it's kind of an anomaly. I'd say you really have to persevere in what you believe in. And if you really believe in it and you retain the conviction based on data to stick with it, but on the other hand, to not be afraid to pivot. It's the Silicon Valley pivot is probably one of the most underrated, overstated but underrated things. And I've never been part of a company where it exactly ended up the way I thought it was. Each and every time there's been a pivot, and maybe that's because I'm not very good at this, but I think it's the more likely thing is that you just have to be adaptable, but then try to reconcile that with persevering. That's hard.
Tom?
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of the sentiments from fellow panelists on what I'm most proud of. It's impact on patients, it's impact on people you've worked with. Advice for entrepreneurs. I think it's a lot about taking risk. It's a lot about don't be afraid to be wrong, don't be afraid to be right. As an entrepreneur, you're either doing something that's too hard or not worth doing. And if it's not too hard or not worth doing, then you can't beat the large cap companies that are in this room at their own game. They're better resourced. They can move faster than you. And so you're going to have to take risks by doing something that is perceived as too hard or not worth doing. And when you start a business, the metaphor I often use is like you don't really know your business yet. I think it takes me 2 years when you're starting a new company before you really know, kind of become an expert in the business of that company, and you have a few of the puzzle pieces. And so, exactly like what Mark was saying, you go around, you meet with people, you meet with KOLs, you meet with industry, you meet with, business people, and they'll offer you a puzzle piece. And sometimes that piece fits, and you need to take that advice and say, wow, I'm making this beautiful picture, this is great, and I'm learning my company. Sometimes that piece doesn't fit, and you have to, sort of listen, but selectively, as you go around and build and really build that conviction that sort of continues as an entrepreneur.
Gene?
I guess I'm most proud of a way of saying I'm so fortunate and lucky to have been part of, these projects that, are helping people, are training, those around us, are sharing. You're in the battle, so to speak, and it's been amazing, and so I'm most happy about that. My advice, or one of the things that I've learned, I would say the clearest is to, control your pride, or try to eliminate, the unclear thinking that comes from greed or fear or other types of wrong thinking, and it really helps to get that knocked off of you. Usually with chainsaws, but that's my advice is think about it clearly and not think about yourself. Something like that.
Excellent. Well, Rockstars, thanks for sharing and launching the OIS 12. So thanks, everyone.